So I grew up, I'd say half in Ohio, half in Michigan. We were in Ohio until I was 10 and then moved to Michigan. Um, I played every single sport I could get my hands on. The one thing I wasn't allowed to do was play football because my dad had banged his shoulder up when he played high school football. And he just said, if I can't play catch with my son, I don't want my son to play football either. So uh, athletic parents. My mom was had her master's in health and phys ed, and sort of was a physical education teacher before it was in vogue for women to be part of that industry. Um, I um, if I behaved myself when I chased my parents up to the park when they played tennis, I got to play home run derby a little bit at the end of the day, and that was like at 4 years old or whatever. And basketball was my first love, but at the same time, tennis gave me something that I could do by myself, and I never had issues with being by myself as long as I could occupy my own time. I was pretty gratified, and uh, being too slow and unathletic to play basketball, it ultimately was a really good match. The sport of tennis and me. Of course, some of the hand-eye stick ball elements were really good fits for me. I was from a very young age very capable upper body, just slow as rocks in from a lower body perspective. So that, I mean, athletically, it was a really good fit, but the problem solving, um, the isolation, the beautiful part of the isolation, not the painful part of the isolation, but the beautiful part of having to solve your own problems. You're the only one that is responsible for your team's performance, and I like that both on the pressure of being self-responsible, and also in I could never have an alternative excuse. I could never say, "Oh, my friends wouldn't pass me the ball," or "Bobby never made a shot," or what any of that. It was 100% on me. And then, with all that said, the most important thing that resonated with me was the education. I had a great instructor early when I was in Ohio, and it was skill development at that age. We moved when I was 10, and the one fella in town that was responsible for tennis development ended up being a genius educator, and knew how to push my buttons from a very young age, and a visionary for how I could develop into a tennis player that could at least challenge, maybe the others' perception of what my athletic potential was, and maybe my own understanding of what my limitations were. The painful isolation is when it's not going well. It's There is an element of being lost. There is an element of uh, uh, more than an element of frustration, or confusion, or any negative thing. And uh, in every other sport, most every other sport, you can tag out if the ball's not going in the basket. Coach can say, "Hey, why don't you come sit with me for a few minutes? Watch your teammates, watch them function as a group, Understand that it's not all on your shoulders. It doesn't matter if you miss. It's okay. You'll make someday and whatever. Um, and that, so I, that, yeah, that painful isolation eventually becomes a part of the beautiful isolation. Um, uh, I, I, I don't know if I ever was, if it was ever pounded inside my head that life's not supposed to be, bonbons on the couch and what have you, but it was never, um, it was never coddled. I was never coddled into thinking, oh no, you had a tough time on the tennis court, and like let us make it better for you. Let's go get ice cream or what have you. It was reality, and I think the more mature we get, we start to value all the pain, all the suffering, and like if you think of the way that Nadal speaks about it, um, he uses that term suffering like like it's joyful, like it, we're supposed to suffer because that helps us understand better when things are good, and to be grateful and to put your best foot forward when it gets pretty sucky. And there's plenty of moments where it's pretty rough. So yeah, I mean, I think nobody likes feeling the way we all have felt in individual athletics, but that growth of getting to the point where you're like, yeah, but I get it. Like I get it, and the next time I face this same situation and I conquer that demon, it'll feel all the better to me, because I know how bad I've felt in that same moment previously. Well, college was the only option, for sure. Uh, I guess, a good junior tennis player, but never even close to a great junior tennis player. And I was the tortoise. Slow and steady wins the race. And so by the time I was a junior in high school, uh, you know the the powerhouse programs, other than Michigan, and they were sort of fringe strength at that time. But other than Michigan, nobody really showed interest. I'd send letters and I'd get really polite emails or letters back. Long before email, and our scholarships are spoken for. You're welcome to try out as a walk on, and like that was not very, it was a very quick message of that's not for me. Um, Four schools that I visited were Rice, TCU, Michigan, and Northwestern. Uh, I really like. I still really like Texas. I played the boys 14 and under hard courts in Fort Worth on TCU's campus, and I was lucky enough to meet the legend Tut Bartson, who was the coach at the time. And so I, like from 14 on, I that was my dream, was to play for Tut Bartson at TCU. As a 17-year-old taking my recruiting visits, it was evident that it wouldn't have been the greatest fit for me from a team standpoint. I adored Tut. He was great. He would have been a super coach to play for, both from a leadership and from an X's and O's and instruction standpoint. But the team was primarily international, and I had nothing against the international players, but I just sort of had a sense that I was going to need a little bit more familiarity especially if I went, you know, a time zone and probably 1,500 miles away from home, I was going to need some more familiarity, and that led me to thinking much more about Michigan and Northwestern. Um, Michigan made an amazing impression on me. My my sister's best friend from high school was there, and she was dating and is now married to Dan Goldberg, who was an NCAA finalist. So I got to know Dan before I went to college, and yeah, and Mal Washington and I are really good friends. We weren't great friends then, but uh, I knew Mal well enough to know that I would trust and enjoy being around him. Uh, There's another fellow that was my grade and getting recruited as well, and I think he had already committed, named David Cass, who ended up playing first singles our sophomore year, and so we played a lot against each other. And I was selfish. I looked at the landscape and I said, well, wait a second, I might have to work in order to be able to play fourth in this lineup my freshman year, and I'm I have aspirations, and I want to compete. I want to compete against the best, and I don't want to compete against everybody's fourth best. Um, so I had some of that going on in my head, and then the last visit I took was to Northwestern. Paul Torricelli, our coach, I had known him for a few years because um, guy named Marco Wen, who played, he's probably 6 years older than me, something like that. Um, Played at my high school, was taught by the same person as I was when we were in Michigan. And Marco played at Northwestern. He told Paul about me, and next thing you know, I was on the intersectional team for the Midwest. I was pretty green. I think Paul knew that inherently and probably kept a closer eye on me than some of the other fellas, and just built a really good relationship, high level of trust. And I went on my recruiting visit, and the fella who I had played in the finals of the Michigan State High School tournament the last couple of years, a guy named Steve Fertowiezo, was a freshman at Northwestern when I was a senior in high school, and we had what tended to be a heated, if not less than friendly, rivalry through high school. I mean, it was pretty contentious. We were both uber competitive, and yeah, and different human beings, different styles, the whole 9 yards. And I walked onto campus, and I can't remember the setting, but Steve grabbed me and just said, "You absolutely will love it here. You have to come here. Uh, this is a great place, and we need you." And it was like that coming from him authentically. He's the most authentic guy I maybe have ever met. Um, uh, Painfully so. Like, I mean, like he was in your face, good, bad, or indifferent. He was in your face, and and I knew that about him. I knew him well enough to know that I wasn't gonna get a you know a shovel full of anything when I got there, and I was either gonna get very little, like, you don't talk to me if and I won't talk to you, or I might even get some tension. The last thing I was expecting was, man, this is the only place for you to come, and that was really impactful. And the team felt right. The campus is. I'm biased now, of course, but I mean the campus is amazing, and it just felt like a great cultural fit. And I was probably that small to mid-sized school more than a mid-sized to large school type of a kid. I mean, one of the things that was helpful for me to become, I mean, freshman of the year is um, maybe even a misnomer, because I was playing number two singles behind Steve Herdewiza, and so I probably had other freshmen in the conference who were playing first singles at their schools. And so it certainly doesn't mean that I was better than them or had a better year. I probably just won more points for our team that my freshman year than most did. Um, and again, that was, I had hoped to play first, but that was one of the reasons I didn't go to Michigan. Was like I just certainly not to be able to be freshman of the year, but just to be able to um, log some competition, and some of those guys did the same. Ty Tucker at Ohio State was probably one of them, and I imagine Ty took it on the chin a little bit more than I did, because I think he did play. I think he did play first singles his freshman year. The summer between my freshman and sophomore year um, was what I would say was the most pronounced leap in my quality of tennis in my career. Um, I went from playing number two singles, losing in the first round of NCAA's, what I would say was objectively a successful year. Um, Subjectively, as the guy who had it, I felt like I really failed. I felt like this was just not right. And then the summer of in between my freshman and sophomore year, I went and played a satellite in the Midwest, which is essentially four futures in a row. We tallied those in groups, so I finished second collectively across those four futures. I didn't win any of the tournaments. I might have made it to the finals of one, or and the semis of a couple others or something. But I won. I had a sustained success over that month. The previous year, the summer between my senior year and my freshman year in college, I didn't get out of qualifying in any of those tournaments. I just took it on the chin from everybody. Like whoever was on the other side of the net won. And so, I mean, that was actually great evidence that college tennis was a real positive for me. I had grown physically a little bit too, like grown into my body. And then, but from that satellite, I went to New Haven and I won a challenger. I went from New Haven to Winnetka, and I lost in the finals of the challenger in Winnetka. So I went from what I felt was failure during that school year, and in the summer, I I mean, there's no other way. There was no way to look at it other than I was I was killing it, and um, I actually beat Al Parker, who was the returning number one player in college tennis in Winnetka, and I beat him 6-0, 6-0. And Al's a good friend of mine, and I don't like to say that, but it was just such evidence that I had grown as a tennis player. Steve Herdewiza walked up to me after I was done, and he was playing in the Challenger as well. And his comment to me is, "You have zero reason to be playing college tennis anymore," which was outlandish and wrong, but coming from him, coming from him one of the most competitive humans I've ever known, and the guy who had played first singles above me my freshman year. That was just, I mean, it was, it, and also being somewhat self-critical just naturally. I was like, that, wow, that, that meant an awful lot to me. So um, I entered my sophomore year super confident from what had happened in the summer, and I hit the ground running and continued to play quite well. Uh, I, you know, I can't remember how I did in the fall, but when I showed up in Minneapolis for the ITA indoor, one, it was like home. I grew up in Michigan and went to school in Chicago, so it was like, oh wow, it's freezing cold, and we're playing an indoor tennis where the courts are fast, and like it just, it all. Uh, I just remember it feeling very natural for me to be successful in that environment. Um, that was it. There's nothing like, and this is it's a funky thing, but there's nothing like going a full week in tournament tennis and winning. You can win a ton of matches, but if that week ends in a loss to a better player, you're still walking away losing, and you're still walking away recognizing that somebody else did what they needed to do better than you did. And so it was another big boost in my confidence to be able to um, um, and at the time, frankly, I wasn't thinking about professional tennis. It was just another step in the process towards being as good as I could be. And then I got smoked in the NCAA's by Jared Palmer. He was a freshman, I was a sophomore, and like like I didn't expect to lose. I knew Jared well. I knew he was great, but I was just so confident, and I walked away. I lost 2-4 or 4-2, and it didn't feel that close. And I woke up. I flew home. I might have flown home that night on a red eye, or I don't know. I got out of Dodge quickly, and we were out in Indian Wells. Um, and I 2 days later, I woke up and got the newspaper and going through, looking at scores, and Jared lost to Steve Bryan, another dear friend of mine, and I think he lost like 1-0, or like it was just like, wait a second, that guy killed me, and then he got killed way worse by the next guy, and that was it was pretty humbling for me, and uh, but at the same time, I still was full of confidence. It just got me sort of certainly got me out of the lane of having high expectations for results. I'm talking to you from Rhode Island. I've been up here for 11 years, and my first tournament of that summer, I believe, was the Hall of Fame Open, and qualified, won my first round. I beat some bona fide good players to get into the second round of the main draw. Midway through qualifying, I walked to the hospital because I was sick, got diagnosed with strep throat, got antibiotics. 3 days later, 2 days later, after I won my first round, I walked to the hospital again. By the way, I walked past my future home. Which I mean, like it was bizarre when we finally moved to Newport. But walked to the hospital again, and that time I got diagnosed with mono, and so defaulted out of my second round match. Went home. Fortunately, it was caught early. I laid in bed for a week, not a month or 4 months like so many others do. And I was able to regain my strength fairly quickly, and yet also was out of practice, not nearly as strong as I had been, so forth and so on. And I played few other tournaments that summer and I hit the ground running again. And it was an ATP event. It might have been my first ever ATP event, and I won two matches in the main draw, and then I lost a close match to Agassi. And Andre would have been in the top 5 or 10 at the time, and it was a different experience, and it was an energizing experience. It was a rewarding experience for me to know that I was making that player feel uncomfortable and was in a position to succeed. And it was after that I felt like, this is probably time to look in the mirror and think about whether um, a dream that became a goal needed to be actualized. I'm a long way removed from the wins and losses, and I think I don't know what you've experienced with others that you've spoken to, but what I really remember and what I love about my time on tour was dinners and outings and practice sessions and ribbing guys and getting ribbed and just all the relationship stuff. Um, as far as um, as far as competing on the tour, I mean, there's a couple of times where I, I will never feel that way again. I mean, just like largely because my wife will never have any more kids, but it's the only thing I could ever equate um, winning 5 sets at night in the U.S. Open, coming back from 2 sets to love down, like that level of exhilaration. It's uncontrollable, and the thing I equate it to, it's different, but I still equate it to um, having children and being in the delivery room when your wife is having children. But the thing I'm most proud of would be that through all that time as a kid who loving sports and ultimately falling in love most with tennis, all that time pursuing excellence and enduring the painful isolation along with relishing all the beautiful isolation. uh, I just felt like if I look back still, I am most proud of the fact that I felt like every day was a sponge wringing, sponge squeezing experience, and I just don't ever feel like I didn't strive to squeeze that sponge dry. I never lost my passion for the sport. Now that has a lot to do with me and my makeup, but it also is it's a tribute to my parents and the way they in, instilled a work ethic and a level of respect in me. My childhood tennis coach Rick Furman, who without him I probably would have played college tennis, but I wouldn't have. It just wouldn't happen for me. There's nobody who ever pushed buttons in me like that fella did. And then my professional mentor Jose Higueras challenged me in ways I didn't know I could be challenged, and certainly ways at times in training where I just said I'm not up to what he's asking me to do, but I kept on showing up. I kept on listening to him. And so, yeah, that sense of eye on the prize, and that prize was the process, not the destination. It was, or the result. The result was important to me, but I loved the process throughout, and I was true to that process. Uh, it was by score. It was my worst loss as a professional. I lost in the first round to a guy named Rainer Schutler from Germany. Now, Rainer was a top 10 player. He made it to the finals of the Australian Open. He was a great tennis player and a bad matchup for me. I think he knew that as well as I knew that. And I had just made it to the semifinals, the U.S. Open 2 weeks earlier, and I I was bludgeoned on the court, and um, despite that, it's one of the first things I tell people when I talk about important moments of my career. Like that, uh, walking in the opening ceremonies and representing the U.S. In that competition, that'll be forever one of the more important, uh, I'll say, accomplishments of my career. It was the only destination I could have possibly had, and there was no chance that I was ready to um, toil on the Futures or Challenger Tour. Um, and I say that first and foremost, I was not athletically or skill wise capable at that age of 17, 18 years old. Easier to say objectively now, emotionally and independently, I was nowhere near prepared. I mean, we like that's one of the things that we have to recognize about our culture in the U.S. and why I one of the reasons why I believe so many young players who turned pro out of high school failed is because their tennis might have been close to ready, but we're in America, we're raised to be adults at 22. We're not raised to be adults at 18. And there's a requirement of maturity in professional athletics, period. But I think that demand in individual sports is even greater. And so college taught me what life was like independently, how to not only solve my own problems. My parents always expected me to solve my own problems, but how to um, get myself into some predicaments that um, I wouldn't have gotten myself in when living at home. Like um, there were just natural guardrails that existed at home, in despite my parents not being super constrictive or restrictive parents. It was, but get to college, do you go to class? Do you do your homework? How much of your homework do you do? How much do you focus? Do you go out at night? Do you get enough sleep? Do you, like, I mean, it's just like endless mistakes just ripe to be made. And I made a bunch of them. And if I would have made those same mistakes as a young professional athlete, it would have just it would have set my career off in a really bad place. I mean, especially the cutting of corners. And uh, now, when I liked something, was maybe a typical teenager. And like when I liked something, it got a whole lot more of my attention. If I didn't like something, I tried to justify why not to do it, um, or justify how little of it I would have to do. But yeah, college gave me what I thought was going to be 4 years worth of developmental growth, physically, emotionally, socially, competitively, athletically, you name it. Um, and I stole 2 years of that experience, and then I, despite that, I do believe to this day I was ready to turn professional after my sophomore year in college. But that said, I failed the first couple of years on tour. I really was struggling, but from a result standpoint, but I was building a great foundation for my future career. The Tennis Hall of Fame is the most gratifying thing I've done since I played. And I've had some really amazing experiences. Coaching Marty Fish and Novak, running a business of my own, um, being responsible for a Masters 1000 from a competitive standpoint. I mean, like some pretty cool things. But um, as a maybe as a college dropout, which I refer to myself somewhat regularly as, who wouldn't want people to see my transcript from college. Um, to enter into a leadership role uh, of an organization that I thought was a sports organization, but really at the end of the day, it's an arts and culture organization. Um, and and I led that from a good place to a better place. Uh, and I do feel like I held my own um, on a number of different levels, be that from a business standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, um, from a visionary standpoint, and and I learned. I mean, like most things in my life, the ledger's tilted in my favor. I gleaned a whole lot more from the experience than the institution gleaned from my leadership of it. But but it's but even still, I am proud of what we accomplished while I was there. I'm a huge fan of college tennis, but the Tennis Hall of Fame recognizing college tennis is is a drop in a bucket. If if that, it's um, you know where college tennis needs more is in that space of what they've experienced here the last several years with uh, with the accelerator program and facets like this. Because if the current professional game doesn't recognize college tennis as being part of the pathway, and clearly the ITF, the ATP, the WTA have joined the USTA in its appreciation and understanding of the value of college tennis. The more those three institutions, ITF and the tours, do it, the more the LTA, the French Federation, Tennis Australia, and all the other governing bodies of the nations around the globe will appreciate that. And so what will continue to happen, it's aided by the fact that the professional ranking systems lend themselves to older, more established players. So it actually takes some pressure off of younger players to get really good earlier in their professional careers, which means why don't you just wait a couple extra years before you get your professional career underway? And I think hopefully the U.S. is capable competitively to keep up and populate more and more of the collegiate tennis population. But there's so much value in it, and that's before we even talk about all the people who've played college tennis. We're never even near good enough to consider professional tennis, but because of what they experienced through youth and college tennis, it's the foundation for their success as humans, either personally or professionally. I think all of us, especially in our developmental pathway, but even uh, you think about uh, Taylor Fritz, be a good example. So Taylor just makes a final for the first time at the U.S. Open last year, and like, well, I think deep down inside, one, he's great at being able to say, this is just this is just the beginning, and he's got a tremendous amount of self-confidence from everything I've gathered that says he does believe that he'll do better in the future. But I think deep down inside, we all, when we experience honor or achievement, we there is an element of we need to value that. We need to enjoy this moment. And I do think that when somebody's recognized as the best at a certain level, as long as they have good people around them that are humbling them in an appropriate way, um, I think there's I think there's a tremendous amount of honor in being recognized, period. And then you change that setting to be the International Tennis Hall of Fame, and uh, have people get blown away by the property and the mystique of the institution. Then it's like, yeah, you can see it. Yeah, I saw it in my peers. Like Michael Stiek came to be inducted. I, this guy looked like a kid in the candy store, and like he just won the lottery, and his wife had quadruplets at that moment. Like he couldn't have been happier. He couldn't have been more overwhelmed. And this was a guy who was, either stoic or, had a propensity to whine a little bit on the tour. But he knew, right? He just knew. And I think the same, like I watched Marcos Giron do well now, and he was one of those guys when I first got to the Hall of Fame, who was recognized as the best in college tennis. And I mean, he would have loved that, and it was, I don't know, 6 or 8 years later before he really started having some success professionally. Like that's there were probably loads of times where he's like, man, that might have been the best it's going to get. Well, this is when I get excited about talking about Jose Higueras. One of the times I get excited about talking about Jose Higueras. Um, his leadership of U.S. player development. There are so many players who've benefited from what I enjoyed from 20 to 34 when I was a professional, and then from 34 to 55 as a friend and in certain ways colleague. Um, Jose is, to me, just about the strongest development mind in our sport, an amazing coach, and it was not the work of him independently, but the work that he led and those around him supported as well as they did to uh, institutionalize a philosophy, to create a system for developing young people. Uh, our nation is probably too large to ever get real consistency across the 50 states, but we're far more consistent from Augusta, Maine to Topeka, Kansas to Sacramento, California than we've ever been. And I think that puts us in a position to be growingly successful in the sport. There's a whole lot of other things that have to go along with that, and most importantly would be the quality of instruction and at the private market level of the sport.